Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Avorion episode 17. I'm Enigmius, and today we're testing the Melapes, our ship that we made that looks kind of vaguely like a honeybee. We're shooting things, and we're going to start off with a little bit of humiliation here. You can see I just shot the guy, and now I'm turning around, and blammo, I collide with what looks like wreckage. Because it's just sitting there, it's actually adrift, and I'm thinking, okay, well that's, I just whacked my ship, but we'll start salvaging this guy, and if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, my reputation is plummeting, because this is actually a functioning ship. Functioning in the sense that it doesn't appear that it can move, but it's still a ship, and I was trying to salvage it. I wouldn't recommend that. Oh, here comes an asteroid. Yeah, I was smash into some asteroids from time to time too. The only major difficulty that I'm having with the ship right now is the maneuverability is very sluggish. If you get up to speed and you realize you have to change direction, it can be impossible. Frankly, it's not just difficult, sometimes it is impossible, but I'm learning. One of the difficulties that I've been having is the default key bindings for navigation are very odd, I find. They just don't line up with anything that I'm accustomed to, and I've been so involved in other things that actually going in and changing them to something that might better suit my playstyle is something that I haven't done yet. I will. It's not the developer's fault that I haven't changed the key bindings, but it's definitely not helping the maneuverability. I've been spending basically all of my time since I created the ship from the blueprint in the normal PvE setup, salvaging wrecks and going after bad guys and trying to get a feel for how the ship performs. I didn't realize when I was going around mining with my drone, trying to get the materials that I needed in order to build first the Spirit and then this ship, and also occasionally trying to salvage wrecks with my mining laser on my drone, that I was picking up equipment and upgrades, and they were just kind of sitting in my inventory waiting to be used. So I had some upgraded weapons based on the stuff that you're given. Instead of the double chain guns, I have triple chain guns. I have 2 of those. And instead of mining lasers, I've actually got a proper salvaging laser that I can use for salvaging ships. I don't have any mining lasers on the ship right now because as the ship sits right this instant, I've only got the capacity for 1 non-weapon turret, and that's being used up by the salvage laser. But I'm actually going to be adding a second salvage laser because I just noticed that I have the upgrade that will allow me to do that. Interestingly enough, I went around, like I said, in the drone, mined enough iron to be able to make this ship, and that included mining enough iron to sell to get the credits that I needed in addition to the raw materials in order to be able to make the ship from the blueprints. And now I'm out of iron, and my ship is damaged, and I can't edit it until I get it repaired, and I don't have a mining laser on the ship, so I completely forgot about my drone. I was thinking to myself, how am I going to manage this? Either I've got to salvage a lot of ships, which with 1 salvage laser, frankly, not a very interesting prospect. I've been doing a fair bit of salvaging, like I said, but that's because that's really the only viable way for me to get titanium without leaving the sector. What my goal is in terms of gameplay is to spend enough time in this sector to get a feel for as many of the basic things as I can. There's all kinds of things to be learned. The learning curve is, I wouldn't say it's overly steep, but there's a bit of a steep section to the learning curve, I guess you could say. And so while I'm getting a feel for that, I'm just sort of sticking around in this one spot. As far as the fighting, you can see we're doing unspeakable things to enemy ships and having a lot of fun in the process. There are situations that happen quite often where it just doesn't make any sense to go face first into a brawl with the ships that arrive in the sector that we could fight without damaging our faction with standings with friendly factions. What I've been doing is when the bad guys jump in, I go the other way and I kind of get a good distance away from them, and then I wait for friendly guys to come in and start fighting them, and that way I can approach and start doing, you know, whatever makes sense at the time, usually going after the guy closest to me and then working my way through the ships that are there. It just makes a lot more sense that way when you don't have to worry so much about taking direct fire from 3 up to 5 different ships at the same time, because I just charged in at the very beginning of the fight without any thought to how I was going to survive. So there was a little bit of wisdom that I pulled out of that. I think part of my future goals for ship design will be not putting myself in that position where I have to hold back like that if I can avoid it. This little bit here, this very brief little build segment, I put the weapon turrets on armor blocks that are extended into the hull by as much as I could fit without driving myself nuts in the process. But I didn't do the same thing with the salvage and or mining turrets. I put them basically right on the front of the ship, which means because of the ship's profile, when you're looking at our ship from the front, there's really only one thing to shoot at, and that's the front of the ship. You can shoot at the outriggers, but there's nothing really interesting going on in those, at least at present. So the front of the ship is what tends to take the most damage whenever I'm chasing after somebody in order to kill them, because they're shooting back at me. That's what they hit. And consequently, my first salvaging laser got destroyed because the front of the ship got chewed up and the block that it was sitting on was one of those that didn't survive. So in this specific case here, I'm basically just providing another armored platform where the majority of the block is hidden inside the ship. You can't really see it. All you see is this little section that's kind of peeking across the top, and then adding another little slope block in just for cosmetic purposes, paint it yellow, put the salvaging laser on top. Bob's your uncle, we've got a better platform for our salvage laser, which would also be where we would put our mining lasers if we were to switch them around. But again, I'm in that spot where I can't change things on the ship at this particular moment. Not the footage that you're looking, but the way the ship sits in the game right now, I can't make any changes because it's damaged. I was actually quite surprised. You saw I pulled up the color menu looking for the yellow that I'd been using for this ship throughout the entire build, to find that you actually have to earn the majority of the colors, and you get them as drops from ships that you beat up. I was kind of surprised about that. I didn't really expect to see that as being the case. Fortunately, if you have a blueprint that specifies a particular color, you don't have to have that color unlocked in order to be able to build the blueprint. It just comes with the color, and Bob's your uncle. So that was good. I was glad that that was the case, because I don't actually have access to the black color at this specific moment in time, and that would sort of change the aesthetic of the ship to a certain degree. So I've got a fair bit more titanium since I started this whole process, and that's part of the reason why I've been so gung-ho about salvaging instead of mining. I don't really have any more titanium asteroids in this sector, and I don't really want to leave just yet. So the best way for me to get titanium is to salvage wrecks. There are a lot of pirate and alien wrecks that only have iron, but I would say 1 in 3 also have titanium that I can get in limited quantities by salvaging with the laser. It'll be even better when I have the 2 lasers operating. It won't take so long. I've read little snippets here and there that salvaging used to be like fantastic. Like, you basically salvage everything you could possibly need very, very quickly if you put your mind to it, and that was at some point changed, so it's not quite as effective. My experience has been you only get a very small percentage of the total resources that are listed as being part of a wreck. So if you target a wreck, in the bottom right hand corner of the screen where it shows the little image and the name and all the information, it'll tell you the materials that the wreck is comprised of and how many, and then you start salvaging, and by the time you're done, what you get is nowhere near what it said it had. But that's okay. Maybe better salvaging weapons, salvaging turrets will be better later on. Maybe there are upgrades that you can get that help it later on. For now, the key for me is that I have access to more or less unlimited quantities of titanium if I'm willing to go through the process of fighting and salvaging and that sort of thing back and forth. I don't think that I'm going to be in this sector that long, that I'll be able to come up with enough titanium to do a ship all out of titanium. But it's good to be stockpiling some at least, so that when I start looking at the next build, things like the generator and the computer and all of those other things that you might like to be upgraded will be more viable than they are right now, when we kind of thought we had only an extremely limited amount of the resource available to us. So what I've been learning basically is that there are certain kinds of stations in the sector. They aren't... Oh, here we go. Yeah, big fat collision with the asteroid. The stations seem to be very, very beefy. They can withstand a lot of punishment, even though they aren't able to defend themselves directly. I've been keeping a very close eye on the shipyard station, because that's the one where I spend a lot of my time. And it's after several repeated attacks from groups of at least 3 pirates and or aliens at the same time, it's still sitting at like 95% health, which is a lot for the amount of punishment that it's been taking. So that was kind of a concern to me, is that you would get to a point where these stations would be completely destroyed, because the frequency of incursions it seemed a little bit high to be constantly attacking these stations. And you can see I'm taking fire from multiple different sources in this particular encounter, and it's not that bad. I seem to be able to absorb the punishment without losing the faculties available to us to keep on fighting. And another kind of idea that's in the back of my head is, as I'm sort of watching this, it would make a lot of sense, like I was talking about with losing my first salvaging laser because it was on the front of the ship and the front of the ship was iron. Based on the profile of the ship and how the fighting tends to go down, it would make a lot of sense for me to convert that front section of the ship to armor. Just make the whole thing armor and be done with it. That would be probably one of the most meaningful upgrades that I can do for this ship. But the other upgrades that I have in mind are inertial dampeners, and there was one other thing. Inertial dampeners are basically, in terms of braking, they're more effective from the looks of things than, say, directional thrusters, which is supposed to be the go-to for braking, because you can specify the poles that you want the thrusters to be firing on, etc., etc. But in my experiments with adding the directional thrusters and things of that nature, I need probably, in order to be able to say that I have reasonable braking in the ship, I need probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 50 meters per second of braking thrust. And that would be able to take me from top speed without boosters to 0 in about 12 seconds. And that to me is a meaningful enough transition from 1 speed to 0 that it would help me with the navigation. It would make it more reasonable to approach some of these structures without colliding with them, because I just can't stop fast enough. I mean, there's all kinds of different things in the chain of thought that goes with trying to decide which of these things work. But in reality, if you have the power outputs, inertial dampeners are supposed to be one of the main go-to choices, just for keeping the ship, stopping it from drifting, stopping it from just carrying on in a straight line when you don't want it to, etc. But the other thing, the other key element that I had in the past put on the ship while it was in creative mode and just goofing around is gyros. Gyro stabilizers. Those are the ones that help the ship to pitch, roll, yaw, etc. Based on what I've been reading, that's a more viable approach than relying on braking thrust. You go in a certain direction, and then when you want to stop or slow down, you flip the ship around 180 degrees and then use your main engines for that purpose. That makes a lot more sense, and I've actually tried that in a variety of different circumstances, sort of in open space where I didn't have to worry about colliding with different things, and it was a very natural sort of way to approach the situation. It's like you make the flip and then you hit the forward motion and you look up and the speed is coming down quite rapidly. That's basically the long and the short of it. Is if we can flip around fast enough, the amount of control that we'll have in terms of where we're going and how fast and what happens when we get where we're going and we have leftover speed, more importantly than directional thrusters that would allow us to just take our hands off the keyboard and slow down, this is probably going to be the long-term solution that I prefer. And the key is having enough power to make these things work, because the gyros and the inertial dampeners are very, very power hungry. So we've got a lot of titanium, relatively speaking, that we can invest in expanding our generators and then putting these extra systems on board in the place of, in some cases, our directional thrusters, because quite frankly, for the amount that we have on the ship, they aren't really doing a whole lot. So we have viable options to make the ship more maneuverable and more manageable, even in the middle of an asteroid field. So that's going to be the key that I'm focused on. We've learned a little bit about the ship's survivability and armoring up the front in order to counter the most common places where we take damage, carrying around a supply of iron so that we can repair the ship as we need to and not have to basically put our plans aside to go and get more iron in order to accommodate the things that need to be happening. Get the extra salvaging laser on board so we can get even more titanium, and by the time we've got all that squared away, I think it would be appropriate to move on to the next sector. My biggest concern is I know that there's a progression, and the farther you go towards the center of the universe or the galaxy or whatever, the more difficult things become. And I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm moving into the next sector and all of a sudden I'm going from feeling pretty good about things to getting my ass royally beat, because this ship, relative to the Spirit, is really just no fun at all to maintain if you're taking a lot of damage all the time. So lots of stuff that I've learned from this process of scooting around and shooting at things with different kinds of weapons and seeing what happens. Salvage lasers not on friendly ships that are still functioning. Triple chain gun cannons work very well as long as you're close to the target and you hit with all of your shots. All the little details, and there's so many different kinds of weapons that you can get that we can experiment with when the time comes. I just have to come up with a concrete idea for our next build, because we're not that far off. So the next episode, there's going to be the blueprint for this guy, and what we'll do is we'll probably just take a look at what I've done between the end of this episode and that episode, just kind of an update with the upgrades that I've made, give you guys that blueprint, and then we'll be on to the next build. I haven't even really decided what the purpose of the next build will be. I'm not even sure if it makes sense at this point in time in a single player game, like, you know, playing the game in single player mode, to have a bunch of different kinds of ships, or if it makes more sense to just have utilitarian ships that can do a little bit of everything. We'll see how it goes. There's nothing saying that I have to make all of these decisions now. I have plenty of time to make them wrong and remake them. You get the idea. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.